Mankind has always lived between walls, raised against the sky, the elements, and each other. Our walls give us a place in an unfamiliar world. But what do we pay for this safety? What is this choice costing you? Every brick we lay casts a new shadow on the horizon, and the promise of security chains us to foundations more tightly than any prison. If we allow it, our walls will lock us into patterns, twisting us into ourselves like flowers trapped from the sun. How can we overcome our own defenses to become who we need to be? There is no easy answer, but these were the lessons once learned by a kingdom and by the man who thought to conquer it. Events of the past have cast long shadows over William and who he has become, but they are fading fast. Born in the land of Camran, William's first memories were of the sharp fangs of winter. His family was too poor to feed him, so they abandoned him at the gates of the local lord before he was 6 months old. He nearly froze to death, shivering on the steps, while crows circled overhead, until finally the Lord Richard emerged from his stronghold and took young William into his care. It was a reluctant charity, but it saved the boy's life all the same. In a way, those frozen hours prepared William well. Richard did not raise him lovingly, but trained him into the perfect warrior. By the time he was a man, William had grown to be as hard and as sharp as a razor, fearless, friendless, and a fighter without equal. William was an instrument of his kingdom. He was proud of his work, but beneath his service swam secret appetites, a lust for control, a lust for gratification, and a hollow anger that he couldn't quench. Driven by these appetites, William tirelessly defended the lands of Camran and earned himself a knighthood. He sat on every military council conceivable, but it seemed no matter what he did, no matter what he achieved, he only won the jealousy and spite of his peers. Would it have been different if he'd been born noble? Was there anything he could do to prove himself? Or was there something more he needed to do? These were the questions William asked himself every day. Until, that is, he heard of the attacks on Camran. When they began, they were seen as rumours. Farmhouses suddenly razed to the ground, flocks of sheep slaughtered in a field. They were senseless, without witness, and could not be traced to a perpetrator. Camran's neighbours never claimed responsibility for these crimes, but as they increased in frequency, an anger flashed inside of William and burned a plan into his mind. If he could not trust his neighbours, then he would fight them all until they swore fealty to the king. This would bring peace back to the land, and according to William's secret heart, earn him the glory he knew he deserved. After years of conquest, William finally came to Iria, a small and insignificant kingdom built on a narrow peninsula. In those days, it was known mostly for its shepherds, its seagulls, and the stern cliffs that separated it from the sea. By then, William had already mastered better nations, so he imagined that when he demanded surrender from the Irian king, it was all but guaranteed. He disembarked from his great galley in the capital, and leaving all his soldiers to guard it, He walked to the castle and demanded an audience with the king. When he entered the throne room, he raised his sword and said, "I have come to demand you surrender your throne. The only way these lands can know peace is under the rule of Camran. If you do not release it willingly, then I will depose you myself." William stood tall as he delivered his message, bathing in his own heightened ego. But his words fell upon a vast silence. For a long time, the old king said nothing, until finally he cracked a smile as thin as a scarecrow's. "It's true," he said. "My armies are no match for yours. But you have not come to me with armies. You've come to me alone, and I will not be insulted in my own court. Guards, arrest him!" At the king's command, 50 soldiers sprang from the shadows of the throne room. William was a master swordsman, but caught up in his own self-righteousness. He did not spot the ambush that was awaiting him. He was overpowered, disarmed, and dragged into the dungeon. Here, the story of William might have ended. But fortunately for him, the king did not rule alone. He was a widower with no sons, but had a single daughter named Brie, whose beauty, wisdom, and bravery were known throughout the land. Though she yearned for a life of freedom, she spent her days fighting for the peace of her people. And when she heard of William's arrival, she saw in him an opportunity. 3 days after his capture, she secretly made her way to the castle dungeon with a few trusted soldiers at her back, and found William pacing back and forth across the cell like a trapped panther. "William," she said, "I'm afraid you've made a mistake in coming here. The kingdom of Iria is not your enemy, and we haven't raised an army in 2 generations. What threat do we pose to you? Why do you want to conquer our people?" William approached the bars and studied Brie's face. He sensed she was telling the truth, but for him, this changed nothing. "You tell me what every ruler has told me over the last 2 years, that you are not an enemy, that you only want peace, and yet, as more nations come under the banner of Camran, someone continues to pillage our lands. It may not be the fault of these leaders, but they cannot be trusted to govern their people." To his surprise, Brie nodded. "I understand. It is difficult to trust the other kingdoms, but I know something that you may have overlooked. Did you know that your kingdom is not the only one to be pillaged?" William paused. He did not. "In fact," Brie continued, "like Camran, Iria has suffered similar attacks. I have come to you now because I want to end them too. I believe I can help you." "I don't need your help," he said. "If these attacks are so widespread, then it must be a rogue army. Once I'm free, I'll—" He stopped suddenly. Brie was laughing. "You're in my dungeon because you left your guards at the ship, and now you want to keep going off on your own like you're the only soldier on Earth. Besides," Brie looked at him seriously, "it isn't an army out there. It's a dragon." "Poof," William scoffed. "My father doesn't believe me either, but I know an alchemist. She has shown me the signs and has the tools to defeat it, but she doesn't have the strength, and I can't do it alone. That's why I'm here, William. I need your help." For a moment, William thought he would refuse her, But then he saw that he had no choice. He could either waste away in his cell, or he could continue his mission. Even if she was wrong, she would be easier to escape than a dungeon, he thought. He agreed to help her. That night, the two of them stole a small rowboat and took it to an island in the Silvery Bay. The alchemist lived there, so no one could steal her power. When they arrived, she was waiting for them on the beach, with staff in hand and a chest at her feet, filled with hidden treasure. In the shadows of dawn, she looked like a strange tree growing out of the ground. She spoke with a voice like breaking leaves. "I have prepared for you a sword to pierce the dragon's hide, a shield to guard you from its flame, and a magical compass with which to find its lair. With these tools you shall be a warrior without equal. But you must be cautious, for the dragon feasts on fear, and a weak spirit will spell your doom. Remember too, that you must return these tools to me when you have finished. They are not meant for the world of man, and if you don't return them, you will suffer my curse." William stared at the alchemist with disbelief, but Brie bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you for these gifts. We will use them for their just purpose, and then return them to your care. I have found a champion who is a master warrior, so I'm sure we will succeed." At this, the alchemist looked doubtfully at William, still restrained, but she trusted Brie's wisdom and finally nodded her approval. "Go then. I have prepared a ship and supplies for your journey. It will not be easy, but many lives depend on your success." With the wind at their backs, William and Brie boarded a small skiff and returned to the open water. When Brie held the magical compass to the sun, it pointed them towards a corner of the mainland that William did not recognize. "Do you know where you're going?" he asked with contempt. And Brie replied, she did not. But her trust was with the alchemist. At this, William held up his hands, which were both still bound with rope. "When will you untie me?" he asked. And Brie replied, "Only when you have nothing to gain through betrayal." They travelled in this fashion for several days, surrounded by nothing but the rolling blue of the ocean, until one day William spotted the darkness of a storm on the horizon. His experience and intuition told him it was too dangerous to sail through it safely, but Brie stood firm and would not alter their course. By evening, they were soaked by sheets of stinging rain, and the sail snapped like a dog in the howling wind. For an hour, their ship held steady. But then, something cracked below the deck, and water flooded over their feet. William held up his roped hands and shouted, "Brie! You cannot do this alone! Release me! I can help you!" Brie swore, but she saw that William was right, and with a flash of her knife she released his restraints. At once he reached for a bucket and began to heave water out of the boat. They could not tell how long they'd stayed like this. Their craft on the brink of sinking, the ferocity of the storm numbed their sense of time. Eventually, in the darkness of night, their boat ran aground. Too exhausted to take stock of their situation, the two of them sheltered in the broken hull until morning. When they awoke, they found themselves in a tangle of alder trees and standing water. A pestilent swamp stretched out before them, filled with humming insects and eyes of watchful predators. William threw up his hands in disbelief. "Look where this alchemist has led us. Some compass." Brie shook her head. "We're exactly where we need to be right now. Clearly, the storm is part of the plan to get us there faster. We're fine." And as if to prove her point, she began packing the supplies that remained. The reality of the situation, however, was that Brie didn't know if what she said was true. The storm had snatched the compass from her hands and washed it out to sea, but she dared not reveal this to William. You see, she could easily identify with William. She was once fiery, dominant, and rebellious, and she knew he was not yet prepared to feel so vulnerable. He was a man of certainty. He did not trust himself with the unknown, so Brie would wait till the time was right. Brie knew in her heart they were up for whatever challenge lay ahead, so she kept her secret and led them deeper and deeper into the unknown. Imagine for a moment what they faced in traversing that place. First, the blindness thrust upon them in the dark shadows of the forest canopy, and the murky waters of which they knew not the depth, nor the creatures that lurked beneath. It stifled their boots, swelled their feet, and spoiled their provisions. They caught no food, found no clean drink, and for every mile travelled, they earned 100 cuts and wounds from the toxic environment. They searched for a week to find their enemy, to hunt the alchemist's dragon, but they did not succeed. Instead, they found themselves sick and exhausted in a damp glade. It was here William finally demanded that Brie show him the compass. "I am sick of following your lead. Let me see it, and I will find us a better path." At that moment, Brie could only look at him sadly. And then William realised what had happened. He cried up at the canopy in despair. "Why did I allow you to lead me here? We'll die here. I should have stayed in your dungeon. At least there I would have been dry." William gathered his sword and their shield and stalked to the edge of the glade with a heavy heart, feeling aimless, robbed of purpose, and doomed. Just before his feet left the grass of the glade, he saw something shift in the corner of his eye. It was a dark and flowing shape that moved with the tension of a viper. How big it was, William couldn't tell. It seemed at once as small as a horse and as grand as a house, and his eyes could not tell the difference. Suddenly, the warrior instinct rose from within, and he threw his shield over his face just as something struck it like a hammer. He flew through the air and into the soft earth, and as he rose from the ground, shouted a warning, "Brie! Dragon!" And so it was, crawling from the marsh like a nightmare, until it towered over William. It was 4 times his height, and rows of muscles bowed like logs beneath its iron skin. When it opened its mouth to roar, William saw jaws that could wrap around his body in a single bite. A jolt of revulsion flashed in his stomach, but this was nothing compared to what he felt when he finally met the creature's eyes. There, he found not the hungry cunning of a predator, but a cruelty that glittered like a hungry star. "You're a coward," roared William, "coming to us at our lowest point. Why don't you face me without tricks? Right here, right now, I will not give you the fear you crave, and I swear I'll take your head." With that, William raised up his weapons and charged across the glade. He charged and did not alter his course, even when the dragon lowered its head to gore him like a bull. The dragon's horns flashed. William raised his shield. The dragon whipped its poison tail, and William swung his sword. They met in that glade with a fury, but their blood mixed with their sweat. Neither found the advantage. They had underestimated each other, and now were locked in a desperate struggle. Brie watched this unfold before her, and though unarmed, she knew she had to act. Digging deep, she shifted from fear to courage and shouted, "William, give me your shield! Trust me just once more." He looked back at her and saw all he had to lose. He saw his kingdom crumbling from within. He saw his people starving. He saw his own body lying rotten in the swamp. All of this flashed before him. Without another thought, he threw his shield to the one who had brought him here. Brie caught the shield, drew her dagger, and she charged the dragon herself. Though her weapon was small, she tore at the dragon's heels and drove it wild, until finally it whirled around to face her with fire spilling over its teeth. She raised the shield, protecting herself while the flames roared around her, and in this moment, William finds his opportunity. He drove his sword into the beast's heaving belly and pushed it to the hilt. The dragon collapsed to the ground, powerless, sending a tremor through the earth. William made good on his promise by taking the dragon's head. In the silence that followed, the two warriors felt suddenly exhausted, as if all the strength had been stolen from their limbs, and they collapsed heavily onto the grass. They began to breathe deeply and found they could not smell the smoke or the violence, but instead they tasted new life, and their hearts filled with gratitude. Their eyes fluttered shut, and for the first time in many days, they both fell into a deep, profound sleep. They stayed in that glade for a long time, recovering their strength, until one morning they awoke to the sound of horns. "It's the Rangers of Iria," said Brie. "They're looking for us. The alchemist must have sent them here." Together, the two warriors went into the swamp to gather whatever dry wood they could find, and they lit a fire that sent great plumes of smoke into the air. By nightfall, 4 horsemen in uniform emerged from the swamp. "Princess," called the lead horseman, "I'm so glad we've found you. Our king will be so pleased to see you are safe and well." His eyes then found the crumpled body of the dragon. "And I see you've done us a great service once again. Thank you, Princess. At first light, we will guide you safely home." Brie bowed her head in thanks. But as the horseman spoke, William gripped his weapons. "What about me?" he asked. "If I go with you, will I be imprisoned again?" "That's for the king to decide," replied the horseman. And William scowled. For a moment, he thought to overpower them. He wielded his alchemist's weapons. After all, he'd just slain a dragon. What were 4 men against him? He could. But then Brie spoke as if reading his mind. "Peace, William. If we had not trusted one another, we would both be dead. You insulted my father, but he will see that you have relieved him of a great evil. I'm sure he will pardon you. Come, peacefully, and this will all be behind us." William didn't like to admit it, but felt Brie was right. His mistrust could only bring more conflict. And so he surrendered his weapons to the Rangers, and at sunrise allowed himself to be led back on the journey to Iria. Upon their arrival, Brie's prediction proved true. The king pardoned William for his transgressions and returned him to his galley, where his waiting men cheered. As the great ship prepared to sail, the king watched his daughter stare wistfully at the sea. He knew that she craved adventure and wanted to visit lands outside of Iria. He saw the way she looked at William and immediately knew what he must do. He approached his daughter and spoke. "Follow this adventure with enthusiasm and my blessing. Go now and share your wisdom with the people. Learn what you can, and when you're ready, return to your kingdom and continue to serve your people." Brie was surprised, but her face lit up with a radiant smile as she saw her future unfold. She would be free to define herself, to explore the secrets of life, and to enjoy the adventure of becoming the woman who would inherit the kingdom. She hugged her father tightly and ran quickly to William's ship. When that galley sailed and William finally returned to his homeland, he began to dismantle the empire he had conquered. He'd come to realise what good were his armies if he became a slave to their use. What good was he to his kingdom if all he did was bring it war? These were the questions William now asked himself. And it suddenly became crystal clear there was so much more he could accomplish. He could protect the ones he loved. He could liberate the people around him. And he could allow himself the freedom, at last, to open up to the world and bring those who mattered into his life. He never again tried to appease the nobles who abused him, but let them stew in their own private envy. He had his own path to follow, and the walls they built, he realised, would never stretch beyond their own estates. So ends the story of William and Brie. Two brave souls who had the courage to look beyond themselves and achieve together what was impossible alone. Is this not true in all walks of life? No matter how powerful we become, we must never let power blind us to the value of others. Entrepreneurs, creators, fighters, and future seekers, all those ready to embark on a project, to fight for a team, to launch something from the depths of your soul, know this: a kingdom is greater than any one man's castle, and this is the secret for all great leaders.
We are born free, and yet our hearts will beat as one. We are born sheltered, and yet we walk towards the sun. We are the sound of the beating of the drums. We are the key. We are the keepers of the flame to shield the fire from the rain, to hold on through the darkest night, to ever be the givers of the endless light. We are the keepers of the flame. Givers of the endless light. We are the keepers of the flame.